Who scratched these names into my walls?" The foreman's voice cracked like a whip across the old orphanage hall, but Arthur didn't flinch. He stood by the faded plaster, his brush dripping white paint onto the dusty floorboards. His eyes were locked on the faint letters beneath the peeling surface. Names carved by small, desperate hands long ago. "They were here before you," Arthur said quietly. The foreman rolled his eyes. "We're covering all that up. The donors don't need to see this mess." Arthur's hand trembled slightly as he pressed his palm to one name, Anna Hale, his sister. The letters were shallow but alive. Each groove filled with dried dust like blood that never washed away. The air in the hall seemed to thicken. He felt the years collapse around him. The cold meals, the silence after lights out, the days she was taken and never came back. "I'll cover it," Arthur said softly, but his voice carried something that made the foreman glance back uneasily before leaving. Arthur stood alone. The walls smelled of mildew and time, but beneath the decay, there was memory. Every scrape of his paintbrush was a heartbeat from the past. He painted slowly, layer by layer, pretending to bury the names, but each stroke revealed more of them, hidden deeper in the walls. Dozens of names, small and trembling, carved like confessions. He whispered through his teeth, "You remembered each other, didn't you?" The wind crept through the broken window, brushing dust across the letters like breath over skin. When he reached the far corner, his roller struck something hard. He stopped, scraped gently, and a piece of plaster fell away. Behind it, a hidden panel, rotted with covered in a child drawing. A son, a house, and under the same initials, H. He sank to his knees. It was hers. She had been here, scared but brave enough to leave a sign for him to find. He pressed his forehead to the wall, whispering her name until the trembling stopped. That night, Arthur didn't go home. He stayed in the hall after everyone left, lit a single bulb, and began scraping. Each layer came off like skin, revealing secrets the building had tried to keep. The carvings weren't random. They were clustered, grouped by years. And under one section of wall, he found something that froze him completely: numbers. Rows of numbers carved beneath the names, dates of birth, and next to them, initials that didn't belong to children but to men. LGFDRC. He wrote them down in his old notebook, one he hadn't opened since the army. His breath came heavy, his old hands shaking. The same initials appeared on the donor plaque outside, the charitable founders who built this orphanage and, decades later, still funded it. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "You didn't just forget them," he said aloud. "You sold them." The words hung in the dusty air like judgment. A door creaked at the end of the corridor. Arthur killed the light and waited. Footsteps echoed faintly, cautious. Then the door shut again. He exhaled slowly. The sound of rain started tapping against the cracked windows. He picked up his brush again, dipped it in thick white paint, and began writing quietly on the same wall, hiding his notes beneath the surface, embedding truth under color. Every stroke looked ordinary to the naked eye, but he was painting a record no one could destroy. "If you won't remember them," he murmured, "the walls will." Over the next week, the restoration continued. Workers came and went, laughing, playing music from their radios. They didn't notice the way Arthur worked late every evening or how his murals slowly changed. Instead of plain beige, he mixed faint tones of blue and gold. If you stood far away, the walls looked clean, but up close, the texture formed faint shapes. Faces, letters, patterns only visible under certain light. A coded language of grief and truth. On the fourth night, he saw something from the scaffolding. A black sedan parked by the old gate. Two men stepped out, one holding a flashlight. They moved toward the dumpster where the torn plaster had been thrown. Arthur's chest tightened. They started sifting through the debris. He whispered, "They know." He climbed down quietly, moving through the shadows. He caught a glimpse of their faces when the flashlight turned. One of them was Leonard Grayson, head of the redevelopment project. The same initials carved into the wall. Arthur's blood went cold. He ducked behind a pillar, watching as they pulled out a fragment of plaster with a carved name still visible. "We can't let this stay," Grayson muttered. "Get rid of everything." Tonight, Arthur felt something inside him harden. the old soldier in him waking from decades of sleep. He knew what this was now. Not renovation, but erasure. The same kind of silence that swallowed his sister and every other child. He stepped back into the dark hall, heart pounding, and pressed his hand to the nearest wall. It was cool alive. "You kept their names safe this long," he whispered. "Now you'll speak for them." The next morning, the workers arrived to find him already painting the main hall. "You're early," one said, surprised. Arthur smiled faintly. "Just finishing what's been waiting." No one noticed that his new mural stretched across the entire back wall, an enormous sunrise over a field of children's silhouettes. Each figure was shaped from layers of faint letters and numbers, invisible to those who didn't look closely. But when the light hit just right, the names shimmered through the paint like ghosts surfacing from memory. That evening, the foreman told him the donors would visit in 2 days for inspection. "They'll love your work," he said. Arthur only nodded, his eyes glinting. They will see what they need to see. When the hall emptied, he locked the door and turned off the lights. The reflection of the mural flickered in his eyes like fire. He took out his sister's photo from his wallet, a faded black and white of a girl, holding a paintbrush beside him, smiling. "I'm still painting with you," he said softly. Then he picked up the brush again and began adding one final layer to the wall, one that would glow under the lights of the ceremony, spelling the words no one could ignore. By midnight, his hand was steady, his purpose complete. The silence of the orphanage wrapped around him like a vow. He stood back, breathing deeply, as the painted figure seemed to look back at him through time. And when the wind moved the broken window, it sounded almost like children whispering, "Thank you. Don't scrape too deep, old man." The warning came from behind him, sharp and casual, but it carried a weight that made Arthur's knuckles tighten around the putty knife. He turned just enough to see Leonard Grayson standing in the half-lit hallway, one hand in his coat pocket, the other holding a cigarette like a man rehearsed in dominance. "These walls are fragile," Grayson added with a smirk, exhaling smoke toward the ceiling. Arthur's voice stayed calm. "So are memories, but they hold longer than paint." The man chuckled, flicked the ash to the floor, and walked away. Arthur watched him go, then turned back to the wall. He waited until the footsteps faded before prying under the fresh plaster again. The knife hit something hard, a metal latch. His pulse jumped. He chipped away carefully until a small, rusted lock appeared buried in the wall skeleton. He pressed against it. The plaster around it cracked and crumbled, revealing the edge of a thin, nailed wooden panel. Behind it, darkness. He pushed harder. A hollow sound. Something was inside. He took a screwdriver from his pocket, pried the nails loose, and pulled the panel open. Inside was a stack of old files, brittle and yellowed, wrapped in a strip of rotted cloth. The air that escaped smelled of damp paper and dusted grief. He sat back on his heels, the world narrowing to the names typed on the top page. Adoption records, confidential. He flipped through trembling fingers. Each document listed a child's name, a buyer's address, a payment amount, columns of transactions stamped with a charity seal. The same logo still painted above the orphanage entrance today. His heart clenched. His sister's name wasn't there, but her year was. He turned another page, and another. Then he froze. One file carried initials he recognized. Age beside it, a red, relocated stamp. No further details. His throat went dry. "You didn't die," he whispered. "They sold you." He sank to the floor, staring at the papers as rain began pattering outside. His old hands trembled, gripping evidence that should have been ashes long ago. Then he heard voices down the corridor. He shoved the files into his paint bucket, threw a tarp over the exposed hole, and kept his head low as the foreman entered with 2 donors in suits. "He's been slow," the foreman said, "but good with detail. Bit sentimental." The donors glanced around, one of them stopping to look at Arthur's half-finished mural, a field of faint blue and gold. "Strange choice of colors," the man muttered. Arthur forced a thin smile. "They hide cracks well." When they left, he locked the door behind them and pulled the tarp away again. The papers were still there, their ink glistening under his lamp. He knew then that this place wasn't just haunted. It was hiding. Every nail, Every coat of paint was a lie stacked on top of loss. He needed proof that could not be erased. That night, he spread the documents across the floor like a deck of ghosts. Each line told the same story. Children listed as transferred, but never to families nearby. Instead, addresses of factories, estates, even shipping companies. Sold, disposed of, replaced with new names and donation ledgers. He realized with slow, painful clarity that the charity's kindness had always been its disguise. He took a deep breath and reached for his brush. If they'd hidden their sins under paint, he would do the same, but his version would tell the truth. He mixed a pale shade of ivory, the same color the donors requested, and began painting over the spot where the panel had been. But underneath the top coat, he used a fine brush to write a message only visible through ultraviolet light. The wall remembers what hands have done. Each letter disappeared beneath the next layer, but he knew it was there, ink woven into history. The following morning, the foreman found him already at work. "You sleep here?" Arthur didn't answer. He just kept painting. "Big day tomorrow," the man said. "Press and investors coming. Don't screw it up." Arthur nodded, his eyes blank but burning beneath the calm. Wouldn't dream of it. That afternoon, he slipped into the director's office while the staff was out. The shelves were lined with awards, charity plaques, framed photos of smiling donors shaking hands with politicians. He opened a drawer locked. He used a screwdriver again, the same tool he used to dig truth out of walls. Inside were ledgers newer than the ones he found. The pattern hadn't stopped. It had evolved. Names of foster homes cross-listed with payment accounts. He photographed every page with his old phone. The screen cracked but functional. A noise behind him made him freeze. The door clicked open. Grayson stepped in, closing it slowly behind him. His voice was soft, almost polite. "You're not very subtle, Mr. Hale." Arthur turned, still holding the ledger. "Neither are you." Grayson's eyes narrowed. "You think anyone will believe a senile old painter over a registered charity? You'll ruin your own name before touching mine." Arthur smiled faintly. "That's the thing about old men. We got nothing left to lose." He set the ledger down and walked past him, brushing the man's shoulder as he went. Grayson didn't stop him, but his voice followed, low and venomous. "Careful, painter. Some stains don't wash out." Outside, Arthur stood under the gray sky, breathing in the wet air. The world felt heavier now, but his steps were surer. He went back to his mural and began working with quiet focus. The brush moved like a blade, his eyes cold with purpose. Each stroke added another hidden layer, an invisible signature of truth beneath the surface beauty. When the final light faded to the windows, the hall looked pure again, clean, bright, ready for its grand unveiling. But under the perfect ivory paint, hundreds of names glowed in the dark, waiting. He stepped back, shoulders trembling with exhaustion and relief. In the silence, he could almost hear his sister's laughter echo through the halls, light and free as it once was. He looked up toward the rafters, whispering, "I'm painting your way home." Outside, the rain stopped, leaving the air clear and cold. The lights flickered once, as if the building itself took a breath. Arthur turned off his lamp, packed the files back into the bucket, and whispered, "Tomorrow they'll see the color of their lives. Why are their faces under the paint?" The question came from one of the volunteers, a young woman holding a roll of Madeira, frozen before Arthur's latest mural. Her voice carried a tremor, not of fear but of recognition. Something hidden was looking back at her. Arthur didn't turn immediately. He kept brushing slow, even strokes of pale gold over the wall. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "paint remembers what people want to forget." She frowned, moving closer, tilting her head as the morning light from the window shifted. The surface shimmered faintly, revealing the outlines of children's faces beneath the sheen, subtle, ghostly, barely there. She gasped softly. "How did you—" "It's just layers," Arthur interrupted, rinsing his brush in silence. But his eyes, reflected in the metal bucket, carried the calm of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. After she left, he locked the door behind her and leaned against the wall, feeling the faint vibrations through the plaster as if the building itself was breathing again. He had found the perfect rhythm now. Every brushstroke was a line of code, every color a confession disguised as beauty. The same donors who bought innocence would soon hang their guilt on these very walls, praising it without knowing they were staring at their own crimes. Each evening, when the workers went home, Arthur stayed behind, mixing colors under the flicker of a dying bulb. He used shades the eye couldn't read without light's permission: ultramarine for sorrow, burn umber for memory, and a faint dusting of phosphor that would glow only beneath the camera flashes on unveiling day. As he painted, the walls seemed to whisper, their cracks releasing breath that had waited too long to be heard. "I'm here," he whispered back. "All of you." By the third night, the mural stretched across the hall, an enormous field of children standing hand in hand beneath a rising sun. To the casual eye, it was hopeful, symbolic of new beginnings. But from certain angles, the sunlight bled into shapes of names, letters, initials hidden in the folds of color. The very same initials he found on the records: LG, RC, FD, the men who called themselves saviors. He worked until dawn, body aching, mind sharp. When the light finally broke through cracked windows, it struck the wet paint like truth catching fire. He stepped back, heart pounding, as the faces in the mural shimmered faintly beneath the gold. Hundreds of eyes, carved from memory, watching the dawn they were denied. That morning, the foreman stopped by early. "Arthur," he said, rubbing his hands together, "the board loved the test photos. They said your work gives the place a new soul." Arthur smiled faintly. "It's not new, just one they forgot." The foreman laughed, not understanding, and left. Arthur looked around the empty hall and whispered, "They're finally seeing it." Later that afternoon, as workers cleaned for the event, Grayson arrived again. His shoes echoed sharply across the marble floor. "You've been busy," he said, his tone more observation than compliment. Arthur didn't stop painting. "Time's short." "So is patience," Grayson said, moving closer. "You've been snooping. The files, the ledgers. I warned you." Arthur dipped his brush again, voice steady. "You warned me about stains. But I make stains for a living." Grayson's smile vanished. He grabbed Arthur's wrist, but the old man's grip was stronger than he expected. The brush didn't fall. They locked eyes, the silence between them thick with years of buried filth. "You think a wall will bring me down?" Grayson sneered. "I think it already has," Arthur said, pulling free. "You just haven't heard it speak yet." Grayson stared at him for a moment, then laughed, a sharp, empty sound. "You're painting ghosts, Hale. The living don't listen to ghosts." He walked off, leaving the echo of his laughter in the hollow corridor. Arthur's jaw tightened. He turned back to the mural, dipping his brush into a fresh mix of dark crimson and gold. The next layer came alive like blood under sunlight. He painted faster, the colors bleeding into each other, forming the faint outlines of the orphanage's original sign, a word only visible when light hit from above: sold. His vision blurred as exhaustion pulled at his bones, but he didn't stop. "They'll listen," he whispered, "even if it's the walls that speak." That night, a storm rolled over the town. Wind rattled the windows, rain streaked down the glass, and the orphanage groaned under the weight of time. Arthur worked through it all. He switched on the blacklight lamp he'd hidden behind the scaffolding and stepped back. The hall transformed instantly. The mural, once innocent, now burned with revelation. The golden sunrise turned to firelight. The children's faces glowed faint blue, their eyes outlined with numbers matching the adoption records. The initials of the guilty shimmered across the ceiling beams. It was no longer art. It was testimony, a courtroom made of color. He smiled faintly through tears. "It's done," he said, voice barely a breath. The next morning, the rain cleared. The sunlight returned, soft and forgiving. The orphanage gleamed with fresh paint, ready for cameras, press, applause. The workers admired the mural again, marveling at its hopefulness. "You really outdid yourself," one said. Arthur only nodded, his hands folded behind his back. "Let it dry," he replied. When everyone left, he locked the hall once more. He walked to the far end, stood before the mural, and studied the sunlight crawling across its surface. The hidden messages were invisible now, sleeping beneath their disguise. Tomorrow, when the spotlights hit during the opening ceremony, every secret would awaken. He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small photograph of his sister. "You'll be here too," he murmured. "Every one of you." The photo trembled slightly in his hand, as if caught in the same breath the room was holding. Outside, he heard the creak of the front door opening. Footsteps entering the hall. "Arthur," a voice called. He turned sharply. It was a young volunteer from before, the one who'd seen the faint faces. She stood near the entrance, her expression uncertain. "I came to get my bag," she said, hesitating. Her eyes drifted to the mural again. "It's beautiful, but it feels sad." Arthur smiled gently. Truth usually does. She nodded slowly, then left, her footsteps echoing into silence. Arthur looked up one last time at the field of golden children stretching across the wall. The light shifted again, and for an instant, their eyes seemed to glint with life. He whispered to the air, "Tomorrow they'll see what kindness really costs." Then he turned off the lamp, leaving the hall in quiet darkness. In that silence, the faint sound of dripping water from the ceiling mingled with the wind outside, steady, rhythmic, almost like applause waiting for the curtain to rise. "Who turned off the lights?" someone shouted as the hall plunged into sudden darkness. The crowd murmured, hundreds of voices rippling to the orphanage's newly restored main hall, where donors, politicians, and press had gathered to celebrate what they called a rebirth of hope. Arthur stood in the shadows near the mural, hands clasped behind his back, heart steady. He had been waiting for this moment since the day they took his sister. A second later, the backup generator flickered on, bathing the walls in bright white light. The crowd gasped. The cheerful mural they had applauded minutes ago was changing before their eyes. The golds and blues deepened into eerie shades of crimson and black. The painted children's faces, once smiling, now looked haunted, hollow-eyed. Then, slowly, glowing letters began to emerge across the wall, bleeding through the paint as if surfacing from the past. The room went silent as the words formed in trembling light. Sold in faith, bought in silence. Cameras flashed, journalists shouted. The projector lights made the mural come alive, exposing the hidden code Arthur had built layer by layer. The donors' faces shifted in confusion. Leonard Grayson's jaw tightened. "Turn it off," he barked, rushing toward the stage. But the system wasn't connected to any power panel he could reach. The lights were internal, triggered by the ceremony's own flood lamps. The truth had been wired into the very celebration meant to erase it. The mural brightened again, and this time the faces of the children glowed clear. Real faces, drawn from the adoption records Arthur had found. Next to each face, initials appeared in faint gold. The same initials carved into the old walls, the same ones from the charity ledgers. The crowd began to murmur names. "LG," one man whispered, recognizing Grayson's initials. "RC," said another, pointing at a nervous councilman near the back. Arthur stepped forward at last, his voice calm but strong. "You said this place gave children a home, but it sold them. You told us charity, while you built empires on their names." Reporters surged closer, recording every word. Grayson forced a laugh. "These are lies." A delusional old man with a brush. Arthur met his gaze. "Then why do the walls know your initials?" Grayson froze as his own name appeared behind him, written in light across the painted horizon. Gasps swept through the hall. The air thickened with panic and shame. The board members whispered among themselves, desperate for control. Arthur stepped up to the mural, running his hand across the painted field of children. "Every one of them carved their names into this wall before you took them. You painted over their cries with new coats every few years, pretending time would forget. But time doesn't forget. It only hides until someone listens." The sound system crackled, feedback from a mic left open on stage. Arthur turned toward it. His voice carried through the speakers like judgment itself. "You buried the truth in these walls. I just gave it back its voice." The journalists were shouting questions now. Photographers surged forward. The governor's security detail tried to push through the crowd, but the room had already shifted. No one was listening to the powerful anymore. They were staring at the mural. It had begun to move. Not literally, but the flicker of light and water reflections from outside made the children's silhouettes seem to breathe. The illusion made some step back in awe, others in guilt. The golden letters shimmered brighter. Every hidden message Arthur had painted now alive under the hot glare of the ceremony lights. On one side, the phrase "they were never lost, only sold," burned through the plaster. The crowd went silent again. Even the storm outside seemed to stop. Arthur looked at Grayson one final time. "You told me some stains don't wash out," he said quietly. "You were right. They show when the light hits." Grayson's composure cracked. "Arrest him!" He snapped at the nearest guard. But the guard didn't move. The others didn't either. Everyone was looking at Arthur now, an old man standing in front of a wall that had remembered everything. The journalist from the local paper stepped forward, camera trembling in her hands. "Mr. Hale," she said softly, "how long have you known?" Arthur smiled faintly. "Since the day they painted over my sister's name." He turned toward the mural, eyes glistening. Her name was Anna. She was 7. She wanted to be an artist. His hand brushed the corner of the painting where a faint, glowing outline of a small girl holding a brush could now be seen. "She finished her masterpiece today." Someone in the crowd began to clap, hesitant, broken, but it spread. Others joined, not for celebration, but for truth, for reckoning. The sound echoed against the high ceiling, slow and heavy. Grayson backed away, face pale, muttering something about defamation. But cameras were already on him. The governor's aide whispered urgently to a reporter, "Check the archives. See if those files match." Arthur stepped down from the stage, moving toward the open doors where sunlight was breaking through the storm clouds. He stopped, looked back once more at the mural glowing in the light. The children's faces now seemed peaceful. "You're free now," he whispered. Then he walked out as sirens began to rise in the distance, police cars racing toward the orphanage gates. Behind him, the crowd erupted into chaos. Reporters shouting, flashbulbs bursting, officials calling lawyers. But Arthur didn't turn around. He stepped into the courtyard, where the rain had stopped and the air smelled clean for the first time in years. He looked down at his hands, still stained with paint, trembling under the sunlight, the same color his sister used to call truth yellow. He smiled. "You did it, Anna," he said quietly. From inside the hall came the faint sound of crash, a frame falling from the wall, the sound of glass shattering. But it wasn't destruction. It was freedom breaking through. He paused by the gate, hearing the rising shouts of confession behind him, the chaos of men facing the ghosts they created. He took one long breath, the kind you take after holding it for a lifetime, and stepped outside. The wind lifted the last drops of rain from his coat. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The building behind him was speaking now, and the world was finally listening. Please like and subscribe for more videos.